Hey guys, so after Columbus makes his four journeys, we really need to talk about the Spanish Empire in a larger view, or New Spain. Keep in mind that Columbus is important because now everybody knows what's out there, and they're going to start exploring and claiming lands in the New World, the Americas, in a big way. Colonies, conquests, empires. Oh my. If you can't tell, we're probably going to talk about Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz later on. Populists are coming. But regardless, Treaty of Tordesillas. There is a giant rivalry, if you'll recall, on the Iberian Peninsula. That's this peninsula right here, by the way, between Spain and Portugal. And the Portuguese making the first inroads on the west coast of Africa down to the Cape of Good Hope, Vasco da Gama getting all the way to India. They are very concerned about Columbus laying claim for the Spanish to lands over here. And there was going to be a dispute. So in 1494, just right after Columbus comes back with news and evidence of his mission over there to the Bahamas, what he thought was the Indies, um, the Pope is going to resolve the tension between Spain and Portugal with the Treaty of Tordesillas, which lays this line of demarcation, basically saying that everything to the east of this line and below this line of latitude, about right here, can be laid claim to by the Portuguese, which for the Portuguese, here's the blue, this is Portugal's claim. That is very important for them because they are interested, remember, right here, India. Okay, that's what Vasco da Gama has claimed for Portugal. This is what they want. Okay, and for the Spanish, they're going to get all the lands to the west of this line, which here in the red, they had no idea, right? In 1494, when the Treaty of Tordesillas um, happens, the Spanish have just hit the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. Columbus has landed in Hispaniola right here. He landed originally in the Bahamas over here, landed in Cuba right here. They have no idea about all of this mess known as North America, even Central America. Columbus' third and fourth missions kind of map some of the Central American and South American coast, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. And the longer this goes on, the more the Portuguese are thinking, man, maybe we didn't get the good end of this. One last thing about the Treaty of Tordesillas, if you'll look on the demarcation line, there is one bit of the Americas that is not included in the Spanish claim, and that is, of course, the nation of Brazil. And that is why Brazil is laid claim to by the Portuguese. They speak Portuguese. They're in Brazil. The rest of South America, Central America, Caribbean, largely Spanish-speaking nations. In the 1520s, so this is roughly 30 years after the Treaty of Tordesillas, the Treaty of Zaragoza is also passed, and that's where, again, dispute will be settled between the Spanish and the Portuguese over the line of demarcation, who gets to lay claim to what in the Pacific, in the Asia uh, area. So that's the Treaty of Zaragoza, like 30 years after the Treaty of Tordesillas. And those treaties were largely made and they're largely going to be respected by both Spain and Portugal. But I think it's also interesting to note that they were passed by these Catholic nations, by the Pope. Most of the Protestant nations in Europe, those who had also felt the effects of the Protestant Reformation, England, Germany, Prussia, these other places, they are not going to be respecting at all those treaties. Okay, the Columbian exchange is the exchange of plants, animals, ideas, cultures, and of course diseases between the New World, the Americas, and the Old World, which is Europe, Asia, and Africa. Mostly Europe, we're talking about. And significant to note in this exchange, as far as food items go, is that from the New World to the Old World, from the Americas to Europe, you're not only going to be getting squash, pumpkins, peppers, turkey, chocolate, pineapples, beans, vanilla, all these things, but corn and potatoes. These will revolutionize agriculture in the old world because they're so high in calories. Think about Ireland. Before Christopher Columbus, before this Columbian exchange begins, Ireland didn't have the potato. and that becomes a staple crop there in Ireland, the main source of food. So much so that by the 1840s, this is just a few hundred years later, they're so dependent on it that when the potato famine happens in the 1840s, you have millions of Irish people literally having to flee Ireland, and come over and immigrate to the United States. Think about the tomato that, like in Italy, known famously for their Italian cuisine, the pastas, their tomato sauce with their pizzas and everything else. The tomato did not exist in Italy before the Columbian Exchange. In Asia, think about, East Asian cuisine. Think about Chinese food, Thai food, all these other foods over there in the Far East. They didn't have peppers before the Columbian Exchange. There was no pepper in Asia. So that's kind of crazy to think about how these foods that we take for granted as staples in these places never existed there before this exchange took place. Likewise, the impact of sugarcane. This is a crop that comes to the Canary Islands, so it comes from the old world and comes over to the new world as part of this exchange, will revolutionize the Americas. Not that everybody's going to be eating sugar there, but it was such a cash crop. It was worth so much money. There's going to be so much blood attached to sugar, basically. It's responsible for so many slaves being brought over from Africa. Um, and most of those slaves will be going to these sugar mining plantations in the Caribbean and South America. When you look at the total number of slaves, it's a much smaller percentage that ends up in the Americas, like the United States, versus the Caribbean and South America, Central America, because of sugar. With animals, again, animals in the New World, there wasn't a lot of animal domestication, animal husbandry. There was a few like groups that domesticated wild dogs. There was the domesticated alpaca, llamas in South America. But really, this is going to be big for the New World, getting all these old world domesticated animals that will assist in the transfer of disease, but also bring about new food, lots of new meat for them, transportation with the horse, warfare with the horse. All these things will be revolutionized with the bringing over of these old world animals to the New World. And keep in mind, the last thing with disease, why does the old world, have so many diseases that it's bringing over to the new world? Yes, we know Europeans were disgusting, their chamber pots, being thrown out into the streets. When you compare with like Tenochtitlan and how clean it was by comparison to most European cities, that is certainly a factor, hygiene, and sewage and these other things. But also consider animals, livestock. There are so many diseases that are spread from animals to humans, that the Americas had just never been exposed to because they didn't have those animals and they didn't live in close proximity with those animals because they didn't have widespread domestication and animal husbandry. Um, so that's kind of why we're looking at all these diseases spreading from the old to the new, like smallpox and influenza, the measles, and malaria. And these diseases come over and they're just devastating for the New World. Something like 90% of all Native Americans are infected, and many die from these European diseases. And of course, there are some diseases that spread back the opposite direction from the New World to the Old, STDs, syphilis being made a big deal of. But yeah, the impact of these European diseases on the New World was catastrophic. All right, Conquistador, a Spanish explorer slash conqueror, and they had been a fighting unit in Spain in Spanish wars against other European countries for hundreds of years. Their weapons, the arquebus, the muskets, the pistols, the cannons, these things are unwieldy, heavy, hard to light. Um, During this time period in the end of the 1400s, the early 1500s, 1600s even, these things are not great for action because they take so long to get ready to fire. but they will be super important when fighting Native Americans, especially at first. Just the awe and shock factor, this thing that can explode. It was unlike anything that natives had ever seen before. So, as part of like a fear tactic, it was very, very useful. The Spanish also, as far as their actual weapons go, that's going to be more successful for killing natives. They have the halberds, which is a pike with this kind of axe and sharp spear at the ends. That'll give them reach. They also, of course, the steel swords that they used are going to be probably one of the most effective things. Most of their steel is made in Toledo in Spain, which was one of the most important and best places to make steel swords and armor and everything else that you wanted out of steel. And the armor, yeah, the armor was heavy, but for the conquistadors on horseback, it was not, I want to say cumbersome. It was definitely cumbersome, but it wasn't excessive. Like altogether, Spanish armor for a horseman was about 60 pounds, which, for a big dude, that's a lot, but that's not a manageable. Um, Now, horse armor, the barding on a horse, that could weigh hundreds of pounds. But these animals that are brought over are pretty hardy. Many of these are war horses. And speaking of the horse, just like the guns, the arquebuses, the cannons, that's also going to be at first very effective as a fear tactic because many natives, all Native Americans, had no clue at first what to make of the horse. There were some rumored to have believed that it was one beast. Seeing a man astride a horse, they thought it was one creature, a monster, coming to get them. Um, and eventually, the horse does get captured by Native Americans. Some of them are freed into the wild, become the Mustangs of the American West. And that's going to be very important for transforming Native culture. But at first, they are definitely a very powerful tool in the conquistadors' um, tool chest against the natives. Likewise, for animal warfare, the Spanish hunting dogs, the big mastiffs, those will strike terror into natives' hearts. These are big dogs that were trained to hunt. Columbus used them, remember, against natives if they didn't bring enough gold. Um, and so the dogs and the horses would be very important. So all this together gave the Spanish kind of an unparalleled advantage over Native Americans. Native American armor had no way of stopping Spanish swords or crossbow bolts or even the little balls from the arquebuses, and definitely no way of stopping the cannon fire. Um, versus the native weapons, the bludgeons, the clubs, nothing that the native warriors had could really do that much to actually kill a armored conquistador. I know it's simple. I know it's breaking it down way too easy. But the easiest way to remember what the conquistadors are after is the GGG, right? Conquistadors are after God, gold, and glory. Gold is going to be the most important of this. So really it should be gold, glory, and God if we're going with what the actuality of motivations are. And with gold and with silver, there's so much that's going to be brought back by the Spanish that it's actually going to lead to not just inflation, where the price of everything's going to rise back at home due to all this influx of new gold and silver. Hyperinflation will take place. Um, Basically, prices are going to quadruple, and they're going to quadruple again within several decades. And this is especially going to hurt the middle class and the poorer Spanish people who just could not keep up with how much everything was costing. So there is a bit of a depression that takes hold in Europe due to all of this gold and silver that is found. And of course, for conquistadors, they are interested in finding as much gold and silver as possible for their own personal glory. For the religious aspects, please remember that the Protestant Reformation is happening right around this time in 1517. Martin Luther is nailing his 95 Theses to the door there in what will become Germany. And this reforming of the Catholic Church, the beginning of the Protestant Christian belief system, will have widespread historical ramifications. And basically, as far as the Spanish goes, it's going to push them to try to spread their Catholicism to as many places as possible.